Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for joining us for our Insight Seminar with the director of our upcoming play, Stir. I'm Sonia Desai, and I'm the literary associate here at the Old Globe. And I would love to introduce my guest. I have a little introduction to read and everything. I would love to introduce the director of Stir, Marcela Lorca, who has gained national recognition as a theater director since relocating from Chile to this country in the mid-1980s. She was the artistic director of the theater company 10,000 Things, and she has directed and choreographed productions for renowned regional theaters, including the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, MacArthur Theater, the Goodman Theater, Minnesota Orchestra, the Alley Theater, the Guthrie, Children's Theater, La Di Da, Milwaukee Rep, Syracuse Stage, Kansas City Rep, Mixed Blood Theater, Shakespeare Theater in D.C., the Juilliard Drama School, and more. So please welcome Marcela Lorca.
Thank you.
So I would just love to talk a little bit about your work in general, and then of course about this lovely play. You are both a choreographer and director. Is that right? How do those two things work together for you in the plays that you develop?
How do they work together? I don't separate them. And for me, movement is a language that's part of theater making. And without really thinking about it, I always use it. It's very important for me that actors embody their work and that we work with a sense of joy in the room. So we dance a lot when we're warming up and we're getting to know each other. I use music and dance, and even in a straight play where there's no dancing, we do that just to begin to loosen up and be playful with each other and be creative, awaken the imagination and awaken creativity. That's very important to me. So sometimes I use it with more intention, when we need to work on certain style or certain theatrical vocabulary that needs physical precision. And sometimes when we need choreography, of course, that's yet another chapter of the movement work. But not every play needs choreography.
You've choreographed all sorts of different types of movement, from including like Renaissance movement as well, right? You've done some work at the Guthrie, where you did some more historical type dances. Well,
I was always a dancer. And growing up, my mother is a ballet dancer. She actually retired a year ago at age 88. Wow. Post-pandemic. And she loves dance so much, and I grew up with her in her ballet school, and then I went on to learning a lot of different modern dance techniques, and this was in Chile during the dictatorship. And what was interesting about that time is that there was a very repressive regime, and movement became the one language that could not be censored because militaries didn't understand this language of physicality. So it allowed us to really express a lot of emotions and desires and meaning, and our work was very much about waking up, about like staying awake and waking up people who had gone dormant, because that's what a dictatorship wants. It's like just people that are not talking, not exchanging thoughts, not saying anything political, of course. So language text was censored, but movement could not be censored. When I left the country, I wasn't thinking about this, but later I became the movement director of the Guthrie Theater, and I did that for 27 years. And I realized, working as a movement director, that I had all this know-how in terms of movement vocabulary. And I work with great directors that required sometimes, period style or period dances, or sometimes it was commedia vocabulary. Sometimes it was just comedy. Sometimes it was physical comedy. so all these different movement styles, and I would do a lot of research and just dive into it in collaboration with the directors. So I really kind of grew into becoming a director by learning and collaborating with a lot of different directors. So that was very helpful to me in my skill building. And then it got to a point where I wasn't interested in being a movement director anymore. Once I figured out that I knew so much more than the directors I was working with, I was like, okay, it's time to just take the reins and do it myself.
And what was that transition like, moving from the language of movement then incorporating text into your work?
I was fortunate at the time. I mean, I worked with 3 different artistic directors. The second one, Joe Dowling, who is from Ireland, he was very fierce about text work and very rooted in language. In working with him, I learned a lot about that. And really, I love sort of the dramatic analysis of a text. And I really kind of fell in love with that. So I'm very fierce, just because movement is my first vocabulary. I pay extra attention to the text. I'm very careful about the words on the page so that I can follow that blueprint in storytelling. So it was kind of a natural progression for me, but certainly something that came after the movement.
That's so interesting. So as a director then, what is the first thing that you do when you approach a new play?
Well, first I read it just to kind of feel viscerally what the story gives me and sensations and kind of first impressions. And those first impressions are very important, and I keep them in my mind as later on in the process of working with designers, those first impressions are important to me. The second thing I do is something that I learned from stage managers, which is a scene breakdown, where you analyze the play and you figure out what each scene, where are the scene's breaks, what does the scene need in terms of sound, sets, who's in the scene, what kind of costumes do they have. So a very detailed analysis. And I remember the first time that I saw that stage managers would do that, and I would look at these charts and I was just fascinated by them. So I do that because it also really kind of grounds the conversations with designers later on, where you go like, well, in scene 7, we need a frying pan and we need this and this and that. So it's just kind of the real logical things that the play is asking for, which is important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So for this play, it was a little bit of a different process because this is a brand new play. It's actually a commission from the Old Globe that we have, seen from its very baby infancy stage to now being on stage here. So we did a workshop of this play with us and the writers. How does working on a new play change your process?
Well, what's extremely unique about this particular new play is that the playwrights are also the actors. And just a funny anecdote, when I was asked if I was available to direct the play, there was a conversation that was arranged for me to meet the writers. And I think the writers had to kind of approve me as a director. I think it was sort of like, let's get to know each other and see if this is going to work. And I didn't know that they were also the actors in the play. So I go into the conversation, and halfway through the conversation, and I had just read the play once, and we're talking about our backgrounds and our process, and all of a sudden I'm looking at them and I'm like, okay, wait a minute, you're also the actors in this play. So that was very funny. And we talked about the importance of honoring the text, in staying creative, staying open to things that might change along the way, but also to separate who are the actors and who are the playwrights, to like clearly state at moments, okay, this is for the actors. These notes are for the actors. And then kind of after the rehearsal, it's like, okay, playwrights, what do you think about this line or that line? In my expectation for them is that they could detach themselves from being playwrights and really kind of dive into their character and just be living within the play, without thinking about the play. So we talked about how that was going to work, and I said, I'm going to challenge you to do that as actors. And so I want you to know that that's important for me, and they were on board with that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, because that's a very complicated relationship then, to be working on a new play and trying to develop it while still living inside of it. Did you find that there was, I don't know, maybe, was it a little bit easier to get into characters for them because they knew the characters so well?
Yeah, also because they co-wrote it, right? So they're writing all this dialogue that's very comfortable for them as playwright friends playing siblings. There's a natural casualness that is very hard to actually achieve with actors that are coming into a play for the first time. For them, it was like it's like a second hand. And curiously, I have to remind them, this is funny, but I have to remind them of like words that they throw too casually that for me are very important. It's like, okay, this word has a lot of weight, use it, or that word, so that it doesn't stay in just the casual realm, but we're dropping seeds that are anchoring us to the story as we go along.
That's fascinating, especially because it's their words. They should know better. So could you tell us a little bit about the process of how a new play changes? Because I think people have this idea that at a certain point it stops changing. But that's actually not true until opening night. You are all in previews right now, and are things still changing?
Things are still changing, but not a lot. I think there were a lot of changes during the rehearsal process because we had a workshop before. They had Donna reading in a workshop here some months prior. There had been a process that was very important. I met them here, actually. We came for a weekend, and they had never done the play on what we called on their feet, standing up, moving around, seeing if the ideas were going to work as embodied people. And we found a lot of great vocabulary during that workshop, so that gave us an ease once we started to rehearsal. We knew that certain things were going to work and how they were going to work. But during the rehearsal, a lot of things changed, because once you start to really flesh out the scenes, you realize, oh, well, that moment doesn't connect with what we wanted to connect. So what do we need to change? Is it the language? Is it the staging? Is it some circumstances need to be reassessed in the story? So there were a lot of changes in rehearsal. Once you get into tech rehearsal, where you add sound and lights, there's kind of a formality where you hope the script is pretty firm, because any little change you want to make requires a big operation. So you have to be very thoughtful about, like, okay, how many changes are you going to really ask the design team to tackle? But today we made a change. We took out a moment in a scene, and that changed the tech, and we ran over it, and we're going to test it tonight and see if it stays, or maybe it won't stay.
That's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
So y'all are the test audience. You're the first ones to ever see this version. And if you don't like it, I guess we're going back. I should have mentioned this at the beginning. We actually did a reading of Stir in our Powers New Voices Festival, not this year, but the previous year. Did anybody here see that reading? Of course, the people that work here that we made come see it. Okay, so you will be a fresh new audience. That's lovely. So there are actually 3 people in this play. And so we have an actor who comes in to play Poppy that is not a writer of it, was that a fun process to get to have new eyes on the script?
Yeah, it is great because not only he brought new eyes and new perspective, but he brings such heart to the story. And I think since the first time we met, we hadn't had the real Poppy, the actor that was going to play Poppy. Once we met the real Poppy, and he just brings a care and a heart that's really at the center of the story that gave kind of like real weight to the story and in a real anchor. I mean, he's the father figure of these two siblings, so he's a very important part of this triangular relationship.
Absolutely. So when we approached you and we said, we want to do a play that involves cooking on stage, did you think we were crazy?
No, I love it because it's so raw, right? It's like, and I mean, the Globe has been so great as to the technical elements that we can use on stage that allow us to not only clean, but wash dishes and do all that, which is a big feat, technical feat. For the actors, there's a lot of talk about movement choreography, cooking choreography, where they are acting at the same time that they're cooking. And that sometimes is a trick because they have to be really listening and responding to each other, but also be doing these sort of menial tasks that you do when you're cooking, moving around and such. So it's easy to get distracted by what you have to do versus what you really what your intention is in the storytelling. So it's taken a lot of practice for them to get on board with it. But what's lovely is that, the audience gets to feel the sense and look at the colors of the food. The sensory experience, I think, is very alive, and particularly in a space like the White Theater where everybody's in the round. It becomes this kind of ritual that is very familiar to all of us who enjoy food and enjoy cooking.
I do think it's incredible to have a working kitchen in the round. It amazes me every time. This is incredible. So at the end of the play, do they have an edible pot of beans?
Absolutely. I mean, when they do. And this piece was born in the pandemic. They got together and they wanted to be creative, and they started co-writing this piece. The third character didn't exist yet, the character of Poppy. And they did a virtual reading of the piece where each one was cooking in their own kitchen. And apparently they rehearsed so much in their own kitchens that, they spend many hours cooking and sort of trying different things that would read on Zoom. So they had some experience with it already, and they knew the timing of things and how it was going to work in the timing of the play. So it works very well.
Wow. So it's like in real time, you get to see the cooking of this pot of beans. Right. Have you tried the beans?
Yes, I have. We've all had, because, this is funny. We've had so many pots of beans. So it's like at the end of every rehearsal, it's like, okay, where's the Tupperware and who's taking the beans home? So we've all been eating beans.
That's incredible. I wish we could all line up and we'll all bring Tupperware too. That's amazing. And they're good?
They're excellent. Yeah. I actually, before I came to rehearsals, I wanted to test the recipe. I think that the recipe is in the program. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to see what the recipe was like, and it's wonderful. I recommend it.
So everyone can go home and try it out. You'll watch them make it. Have there been any kitchen accidents?
Well, Joel, the actor, kind of nicked his finger the other day with a sharp knife, but it's just very minor. So now we have some bandages on stage in case that happens. We hope it never happens again, but one peculiar thing about, I think I can tell you the secret, but The first time we were chopping onions with a knife that wasn't too sharp, and the scent was very, very strong, and it lingered in the room for a long time. And then we started to use much sharper knives to cut the onion, and the scent was much less. So we wanted scent, but we didn't want it to be overwhelming. So now they're using very sharp knives, and it works.
That's exciting. That's the exciting part of live theater. You never know what's going to happen. That's so wonderful. This is a story, I think, also about cooking, of course, but also at the heart of it about family. What about that really, did that speak to you? Did you feel, it's set during the pandemic, but I don't feel like it is a heavy story, even though it is about grief and collective kind of like grief about the pandemic. What about it allows it to not sit in that?
I think partly because it's siblings talking to each other, very unfiltered, saying, having a banter with each other, not being afraid sometimes at crossing the line and saying what's in their mind they're very free to speak to one another. And in that freedom, there's a lot of humor. So even though they're going through difficult circumstances, the way they talk to each other can be very, very funny. And it's a little off the wall at times, and it transgresses into that territory of like, I can't believe you just said that. So it's funny and refreshing that way, where they just have such a familiarity with each other that makes it very easy for them to talk like that.
Yeah, I will say I have a younger brother, and when I watch this play, I really do feel like they're siblings. I'm like, okay, that's real. You yell at each other, and then the next second you're like, I love you. Yeah, and it feels really natural and lovely. That's so exciting. I think we have time to take some questions, if anybody has any. We're going to have somebody come down and give you a mic so that we can hear you.
Hi. How is it to direct in the round? Because I'm always stressed out buying tickets in the White Theater because I'm thinking, what's the real front?
I love it. I mean, the company that I'm artistic director for right now, we do everything in the round, and we actually do theater with no tech so that we can travel to different communities. And we set up the chairs in the round, and we just tell the story. The trick from a directing point of view is like, okay, where is the focus when? Like, I have to direct where the focus needs to be, or kind of like shine a light where I want the audience to look at. But I think what it allows us to is feel very close to the action, for the audience to be feeling kind of part of the action, and for the actors not to be worrying about the kind of artificial thing about, when you go to a proscenium theater, that the actors have to be like talking to each other, but like kind of like what Sonia and I are doing right now. Yeah. We're talking to each other, but we have to keep opening up. So they can live more naturally in the space. But that said, it takes some technical skills to kind of figure out how to best work it. And I think that there's more opportunities for a more dynamic staging than you would in a proscenium.
I will say that the set of this piece really embraces the idea of it being in the round. And it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. I'm not going to give anything away, but it's very cool to see the way that y'all negotiated the idea of having a kitchen in the round and everyone being able to see everything. Very cool.
Yeah, and I just have to add, one of the most challenging things, when I read the play, I thought it was going to be in a proscenium because it's two people that are on Zoom, and I kind of immediately kind of envisioned it, and I hadn't heard much about where I was directing. And then I was informed it was in the round, and I'm like, oh, okay, let's like completely shift that and really investigate it. So there's the challenge of like, we're actually on Zoom and we're cooking from different spaces, yet we're fluidly moving through one space. It's a theatrical challenge that the designers and I and the actors had to embrace. But theater is a wonderful place where everything is possible. So you just have to figure out how to make it happen.
Very cool. We have a question here, and then come to you.
Yes. I was fascinated with the idea of movement, and it's something I never really give much thought to during a play, except once you started talking about it. Now, when it comes to movement, are you pretty much the sole person responsible for where everybody's going to move, or is this somehow a collaboration with the rest of the actors?
I like to think of it as a collaborative process. I could be like a traffic patrol and tell people where to go, but I prefer to have the actors really kind of find their way until they're lost. And then, because they have to own their work. At the end of the day, the director leaves after opening night, and they are the ones who are on stage running the show. So they have to have real agency and ownership of their work in order to tell their story. So I like it. I like to follow their impulses. But sometimes they don't have impulses in certain moments, or they get a little stuck, and that's where I come in and I go like, well, why don't we try this or that, and I sort of, what I call it, I clean it up for them.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes. The question was, is there room for any ad lib in the play? Please tell us.
Yes, if things happen, like somebody drops a spoon, or yesterday somebody dropped a phone, and they get off course, they will ad lib, and again, because they're so familiar with each other, they feel free to do that. The most important thing, rather than being perfect in a performance, it is to be present in a performance, to really kind of listen to each other and stay connected. So that's again the wonderful thing about live theater. Is not a movie, and you can't do the same thing twice or say the same thing in the same ways twice. If you see this play tonight, you'll see it one way. Come another day and you'll see a different version of the play, hopefully, within the same parameters, but you'll feel differently about certain moments.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, please.
Is this a world premiere for this play?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
What was the process to get it out there, to get it produced?
This one had quite an interesting process because we have had Melinda Lopez, who is one of the co-writers and in it, has been here before. It's a good friend of the Old Globe, and we approached her and we want to commission you to write a brand new piece. And she says, I actually have something that I've been working on that I would love to bring to you. And she brought us Joel Perez, who's the other co-writer, and said, you're going to want to know this guy. And then we've just had the pleasure of working with the two of them through these several workshops, including the one that Marcela did for us. So it's really been kind of an Old Globe baby. We're very proud of it.
Yeah, and it's important to have, for writers, to have the space and time to test their ideas, go back to the drawing board, write some more, make it better, and ultimately produce it. I think it's been a 4-year process to get to this point. So we're very excited about it, and how rare it is. I mean, there's a lot of new things about this play. We've been talking in rehearsal about, it's a play about a Latino family, and it's a comedy. It's very funny. Usually Latino plays can be very, very tragic, or about, what's wrong with, what problems do they have. They have a problem, but it's a universal problem, and it actually works as a comedy. Comedy's hard. It's hard to write. It's hard to find. It's hard to deliver. Sometimes comedy is the hardest thing, and we're just so joyful that it's turning out to be a really funny new play. that has really profound themes in it as well. That's a rare combination, I think. So it's a joyous event to have this new play produced.
The question was about how you hear the actors in the round and how you deal with the fact that, at some point the actor is going to be facing away from some of the audience. And so how do you think about that and the process?
There's two things that we do. One, the staging moves about quite a bit in this play. So if you miss something, next moment, they're going to be facing you. So maybe you won't get every line, but you will get most of the play. The staging is very dynamic, so it's like not that we're stuck in one position for a very long time. So that helps. And the other one, the actors work very consciously on energizing their vocal projection and I've been on them on this, to the ends of the lines, so that and also really to use diction to be very clear with their language. So we're trying both those things.
Your statement that putting a kitchen on stage was technically difficult. From a naive point of view, it sounds pretty simple. You just have a tank with a pump that's the sink and a bucket that catches the water, and you put a stovetop there. So what was it that made it difficult?
Ooh, you'll see. I don't know how much to give away.
Well, I can just say there's plumbing involved in heavy-duty electricity. And one thing I learned that was a concern is that the electrical needs of a stove are much greater than what, a theater generally has capacity for. So electricians had to be involved in how the stove works. But I won't tell you more than that. There's a little more complication than that.
The induction stovetop uses very little energy.
I wonder, is that the best for simmering beans? We'll have to test. We'll have to test it out. Other questions? Oh, yes, please. She's coming around with the microphone. Thank you.
I'm curious what the experience of using multiple languages might have included. This is a Latino family. Mm-hmm. You are a Spanish-speaking, I presume, as your first language director, and yet we're going to be hearing it in English. How was the navigation of language to language managed?
That's a lovely question.
I don't think you'll miss any of the story when you hear Spanish, and I think you'll be surprised as to how much you will understand Spanish. You'll have a feeling like you'll understand Spanish, even if you've never heard it before or learned it before. It's a pretty seamless sort of. It's mostly English, with a little Spanish sprinkled here and there, but the way that actors express their Spanish will tell you a lot. I actually really love when there's foreign languages woven in or orchestrated in plays, because it just brings us closer to cultures that we think they're far away from us, but they're not. It's just there's a language difference.
And each of the characters has such a unique relationship to language in the play. So that's also, I found really exciting.
Yeah, and this family is, the father is from Puerto Rico, the mother's from Cuba, the children are children of first-generation immigrants. So they are Americans. And so it's like they're also kind of filtering their cultural background in their own unique way. And I just love sort of the sprinkles of both, of Cuban influence and Puerto Rican influence, but definitely kind of a Caribbean feel to the culture.
Lovely. Thank you. Are there? Oh, yes, please. We have time.
I find it really interesting that the third character, Poppy, wasn't added till later on, considering that it sounds like he's such an integral part of the play. At what point was he added, and how did that happen?
Go ahead.
He was added when they first decided that they wanted to make it into a theatrical piece. I think they had this big conversation about what does it mean to have done something as a Zoom play during the pandemic, and then to transfer it to a live theatrical piece. Why do it if it's going to be the same? And so I think Poppy was the thing that really opened up the play for them, and I feel like it's really shaped the play in some interesting ways.
One thing that's important is it's not a play that uses solely realism. There's a very realistic part of the story. They're cooking on stage, that's all very real. But there's a magical dimension to it, and there's a mystery dimension to it. And Poppy's very linked to that magic and that mystery, and it all stems from the sort of the family rituals, which is to play domino. That's what binds them together and brings them together. But what I love about it, and again, it makes the best use of what theater can do, which is open up this sort of magical moments for us where we get to kind of go into the belly of a mystery, of something that really binds this family that's mysterious beyond words and beyond understanding sometimes. So that's that's one of the things that drew me to the play. It's like, oh, cool, we get to play with these sort of magical realism moments, which are really satisfying.
I think we have time for one more question, if there are any. No? All right. Well, thank you so much, Marcela. I really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you.